Deep in the lush forests of Wales lies the birthplace of arguably football's first superstar. Often referred to as the Wizard of the Dribble, his name was Billy Meredith. A classic winger of his time, Meredith's mesmerizing displays soon created a reputation that attracted huge crowds wherever he played. Brought up within the tight ranks of the Welsh mining community, life then was a lot harder. Professional football was in its infancy and seen as something you did outside a proper job. Whilst Meredith would become Manchester City's prime attraction, his meagre earnings were no different to anyone else's. A footballer then was very much a second-class citizen.
There would be a bus or train ride into Manchester and then maybe a coach trip when he made his debut for Manchester City up to Newcastle. I'd get back in the early hours, sometimes late Sunday or early hours of Monday morning, and do another shift. And so it's very hard to comprehend what they had to go through. And he was a leader of men.
Meredith's achievements are still highly revered by the Welsh, and his legacy remains to this day. He was proud of his roots at a time when playing for your country was far more important than playing for your club. Meredith was an outspoken character, regularly quoted in the media for his frequent criticism towards the footballing establishment. He was also one of the first players to be used in a football promotion, shown scoring the winning goal for Manchester City in 1904. The ad was actually made a week before the final. Meredith, though, duly obliged by scoring the winning goal. Another standout feature was his toothpick. It never left his mouth, even when playing. It was an old habit adopted from his time underground. Today, for a star of his caliber, to endorse such a product would surely be worth a small fortune. It seemed he could do no wrong, but despite his ever-expanding popularity, Meredith would soon become a target, first with a sensational banning, then an equally controversial move to neighbours Manchester United, where he won Cup and League, before becoming the motivator for a new players' union, prompted by his frustration towards the football hierarchy.
Just prior to the strike, he'd been burnt out, he'd lost everything. There'd been some fire there, reduced, he was bankrupt in fact. So he needed some money, but I guess the fact that he was prepared to stand out and say, I'm not going back, I'm not signing on, I'm going to defend the union, was enough to rally the players around him. The first union that came into being in the late 1890s had top players in it, and it didn't survive. It isn't always guaranteed that top players are going to be successful, but I think that what Meredith brought to the show was a concern for smaller players.
It was always seen as the rules and legislation were drawn up in favour of the clubs and the club owners, and there's no doubt at all that they took advantage of that.
A strike seemed unavoidable, as both sides agreed to disagree, with Meredith singled out as the prime agitator.
It's always been a struggle in the league, that the big clubs have always wanted to get rid of the little clubs because the little clubs hold the big clubs back. And the union, I think at the beginning when it was put forward, was seen by some directors as could have been of use, that the players organised themselves and could to some extent push for things that the clubs wanted, because after all it's the clubs that pay all the under-the-counter money and the players generally accept the money.
Football's always had a temptation, even in the days of the maximum wage. Under the table, we'll put a fridge in your house.
The battle for a financial deal was drawn out and demoralising. Whilst Meredith urged members to stand firm, others did not have quite the same courage or tenacity. A golden opportunity was subsequently lost, as the FA used intimidation to get the new season off and running. However, the Players' Union was now an official entity, maybe not with the full support it had hoped for, but with definite rules that Meredith insisted they stood by, and would remain the PFA's strict guidelines in the future.
In his later years, he used to still come to the annual general meetings of the union. Cliff Lloyd told me that when he'd gone to see him in his dying days, and he was lying there on his deathbed, he asked Cliff to look under the bed. And Cliff looked under the bed and there was a battered suitcase, and he asked him to pull it out and open it up. And he opened it up and it was just packed full of medals and trophies and caps. And he said to Cliff Lloyd, who was the Secretary of the Union for many years, he said, make sure you always remind your members that they didn't look after me in my old age. So he was still fighting the fight in his last days.
Meredith and the music hall were both top draw cards of the era. To get into the theatre, an inducement was the only guarantee to a good seat, especially for a comedy with a top cast or a satire based on football's various problems or personalities. Meredith's following was just as strong off the field as on.
A friend once told me Billy Meredith could not only dribble past the entire opposition with his eyes shut, but could also change his toothpick at the same time and still score the winning goal. And he could do it, believe me.
Comedy was the key to attracting a good audience. The Bogus Agent skit was a popular act in which the main character, Mr. Stiffy, was never short in promoting himself.
I used to keep goal and was well known to fame as the greatest goalkeeper, and Stiffy's me name.
Joining Mr. Stiffy as his assistant was a young Charlie Chaplin before he went on to become a Hollywood superstar. Masquerading as the Bogus Agent, he would show off a few sly tricks of his own, trying to capture Stiffy's attention and hopefully his signature. But alas, not always with the best end results.